All right, we're back with another episode of the Pineapple Perspective with Troy Hooper. I am Troy Hooper, and this is sponsored by the Pepper Lunch Restaurants. Today, another phenomenal guest, somebody I've known for a minute or two, a peer in the industry, a gentleman with an established and distinct background of success. And we're excited to have Mike LaRue on the show. Mike, how are you?
Fantastic. Happy to be here. I know it's been a little challenging getting on here, but I'm here.
Glad to have you. We'll take it when we can get it. So, Mike, we'll get into your background and bio as a man in all things franchising, particularly in the restaurant industry. But we like to start our shows off by asking our guests first, what does hospitality mean to you?
It's funny since I've been watching your podcast, I've been thinking about this. And I think if I were to pinpoint it to one thing, there's a phrase people will never remember what you say or what you do, but they will always remember how you make them feel. And, when it comes down to hospitality, I always, I always feel that that's the one thing that if a brand, I mean, whatever, um, restaurant, hotel, if they make you feel a certain way, then they can mess up in all other areas that restaurants or hotels will typically mess up in. But if you can go out of your way to make that guest feel special, unique, then you allow yourself way more flexibility on making some mistakes because the mistakes are always going to happen. But if people feel like they're valued, then I think you're in a pretty good situation. And unfortunately, it's rarely done.
Yeah, had Jeff Alexander on earlier today, and he said that was the one thing he's been really harping on the industry about is we're kind of just a generic commodity. There just doesn't seem to feel like there's a lot of special feelings going on out there, that we're really focused on the wrong things and not really focused on the right things. And I think there's certain brands, both in restaurants, hotels, resorts, airlines, and stuff that that might still try and still get it a little bit, but it is hard to find. And I think more often than not, we're certainly disappointed. Mike, where did you come up with that? I'm sure that, I mean, that's a common phrase. We've heard that, right? But you've adopted that. You believe that. You talk about how to make people feel when they're in your establishment or interacting with your brand. Where does that come from? What's your background in understanding what hospitality is and developing what you think hospitality means?
It's funny. Not a lot of people know this. I've actually never really worked in a restaurant. And so but I come from the perspective as a guest in restaurants and then from the franchise development side. As a guest, the Chick-fil-A's and stuff like that, that's always a different experience. But I would say that in 2010, I actually got a video that was shared by actually Paul Tran.
Oh, wow.
And it was Simon Sinek's How Great Leaders Inspire Action. It was at that point where, he talks about it was at the limbic system and talks about how, when you start with why and you lead with more of a purpose-driven approach, you can connect people on an emotional level. And I think it all started from that point. And over the years since that time, I've always been trying to figure out, how can that be incorporated into not just restaurants, but from a franchising perspective. And so yeah, if I were to pinpoint it to one thing, it was that video, and that video just it hit me like a ton of bricks.
Well, thank you, Paul Tran. For those that don't know, Paul Tran is the director of franchise development at Pepper Lunch
Yeah,
Restaurants under the Hot Palated America flag. He was not in 2010, but it's a small circle. It has
it
its
is.
incestuous moments, and especially here in Southern California, where a lot of us live, it's a tight knit community in a lot of regards too. So it's awesome to hear that it goes back that far, and that was sort of a trigger for you. Which I think we all have moments like that. We all have those things where we can look back and go, "Oh, yeah, that's where that was formed, or where that happened, or what I remember triggered that thought and how I changed what I do." And we all have that. It's called development and growth and things like that. So, Mike, talk a little bit about your history, just to give the audience some context to who we're talking to. You've never worked in a restaurant. I didn't actually know that. Look, I'm even hitting the camera. I'm so excited. What? Okay, I didn't know that. I just assumed all of us crazy people working in restaurant today had to have started in a restaurant. I mean, I started as a
No.
busboy in a Bennigan's, right? So, tell us a little quick story about your trajectory and how the heck you ended up being the restaurant franchise guru of the world here.
I do feel like I was a little robbed of that experience, just because it's, hourly employees when they start young, there's just so much you can gain, especially when you're under like the leadership of incredible people. Gosh, this goes back to 2006. I had a direct marketing company with a buddy of mine, and it was like direct mail when that was like the hot thing through car dealerships and mortgage companies, and that was getting kind of old and wasn't super stable. And so I want to go into a restaurant one weekend and loved it. It was such a cool experience. And like the next week, this is when Monster.com was the thing. So I was cruising on Monster just looking at stuff, and that restaurant was hiring. I wasn't looking to get into restaurants, but when I clicked on it, it was talking about franchising and how, they were looking, you're dealing with entrepreneurs and business owners and, high net worth investors. And that struck an interest. I got my degree in business economics around entrepreneurship. So yeah, that led me to go interview, and that started my path. And so, focused on the franchise sales side of things for call it my first 7 years. And in franchise, I was just kind of thrown into the fire. You go through and you get an overview of the FDD, and here's what to say, here's what not to say, and that was basically it. And through those years, I learned a lot of what not to do as an emerging brand, and saw a lot of really, really, really cool concepts that just fizzled out because either they didn't have the right components to give them the ability to scale successfully. And then came across that Simon Sinek video, and it was okay. This is cool. Now how can I incorporate this into franchising? And started an advisory consulting firm that initially was focused on franchise sales. I couldn't figure out how to scale that successfully, but I think a lot of that had to do with there was so much more that goes into, getting a brand set up correctly to actually go out and start, selling franchises. And so that led me into, a buddy of mine, and we partnered up. He was still is a construction guy, successful GC, and we wound up, or he wound up actually building the first Halal guys in Southern California, which was the second franchise location. And Paul Tran, he was a franchisee of the Halal guys, and they'd reach out to us. They're like, "Hey, we're not really having a good success with the architect," and that kind of led us into doing that second location. And this was a perfect example of a brand that wasn't fully ready to scale. And because people had been, Halal Guys was obviously a famous brand. Everybody in the industry knew what Halal Guys was. And so as soon as they flipped the switch to start franchising, when they sold, it's like I feel like they sold out the country in a very short period of time. Well, they didn't have they didn't have a design manual on actually, hey, how do you build a restaurant? So first location opened in Chicago, or first franchise location, didn't look like anyone wanted it to. And so my partner at the time built the location in Costa Mesa, and that was like, okay, this is what we had in mind. So we came in, and at the time, really didn't have any idea what I was doing, but we figured it out. And we, I was a relationship guy, so we went through, we cleaned house and vendors, and we basically organically built and created an onboarding and created processes for the franchisees to actually get their restaurants open. They want to be in a client of mine until COVID hit, and had some other clients that kind of phased out. People just kind of paused when it came down to franchising in general, and that's when my wife and I had a little girl, and it was like, okay, well, what do I want to do when I grow up? And all of that experience from the franchise sales to even the real estate and the construction side kind of gave me the toolbox, if you will, to be able to go out and do something at that next level. And was fortunate enough to get recruited by Junior Ramen Bar, and started there in January 21 and had a really good run. Wasn't really looking to leave. And I laugh and say I got plucked
Pun
to
intended when you realize where
yeah,
you work
exactly.
now. Yeah.
And I started with Angry Chickz in October of last year, coming up on my 1 year anniversary. And
Wow, time flies.
I know, really.
Holy moly. I would have guessed it's been 6 months, maybe.
Uh, well,
Yeah.
I remember you talking about Pepper Lunch before
Yeah.
it was just a phone call and a few conversations. I don't think you had even flew out there yet. So
That was 2 years ago this week.
two big anniversaries coming up.
Two big anniversaries. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, that's been kind of my path, and it's been kind of one of those like situations to where it's like I feel like it's like I feel like I've had some success, but it took a lot of those what am I doing with my life to now in retrospect look back and be like, okay.
This makes sense.
So yeah, it's obviously I love the industry and ready to get onto the franchisee side of things with the brand that I'm helping build. So yeah.
So we'll talk a little bit about Angry Chickz, the brand you're with now, and where they came from and all that in just a minute. Let's touch now that we've got a little history on you on some topics around the industry, particularly around
Mm-hmm.
franchising. You've started doing a fair bit of content online, particularly videos on sort of thoughts of the day or topics that come to mind from conversations you're having in real time, sort of bringing that inside baseball to the audience that follows you on LinkedIn or other places. Talk a little bit about what you're most interested in, passionate about, concerned about, some of those topics that are coming out of those videos. What's on your mind in regards to franchising in general today?
When I say it, scaling a brand correctly, I feel like a lot of people, even in the industry that have been doing this for a long time, still don't fully grasp what that means. Specifically in franchise sales, I feel like brands are so quick to get to that, hey, we're selling franchises now. Initially, I thought maybe they just forgot or they don't care about those components. And I think at the end of the day, everyone, people want to do it right. But I also feel like there's a lot of people in the industry that are so-called consultants that are more self-serving and are guide a brand down the path of, hey, now you're ready to sell franchises, and these are some of the components that you want to focus on. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to how do you scale from Southern California to New York, and how do you attract operators, like not and again, I'm specifically talking restaurants, because I do there are businesses you can well how many franchises
Yeah.
are out there, like 5,000 or something crazy like that. I mean, you could practically franchise anything, unfortunately. But specifically with restaurants, you have to be able to talk to an operator and they have to be able to get it. And I feel like a lot of times it's more of a brand trying to promote, like, hey, this the shining object.
The
Hey, we're the
Flash. Yeah.
fastest growing this, or we're the first to this, and don't necessarily focus on the back end of, hey, here's actually what's inside the engine that creates this shiny object. And so I feel like it's becoming less. I feel like doing it the right way is becoming more common. You got guys like you and Greg and Sam and those guys. I mean, people are, there's brands that are doing it right. And I feel like it's more often now than it has been in the past, but I still feel there's a lot of education that I think needs to be done on, hey, if you want to get from 5 to 20, what's going to get you to 20 is not what's going to get you from 20 to 100. And
Yeah.
I don't honestly, I don't necessarily know, what that looks like. I know on the franchise sales side of things, they've talked about, creating more education or licenses to, qualify people who are actually, representing and selling franchises. But that all kind of leads to this end goal of scaling to where a brand can impact every community that it goes into. So the company I started was Ignite Franchise Group, and our why was, we believe in positively impacting communities by helping entrepreneurs prosper through franchising. And at the end of the day, what that meant is, I feel food. You're never going to wake up not being hungry. Doesn't matter what AI or technology comes out, like, you will always wake up being hungry. So food Food can bring people together. Food can raise money. Food can make huge impacts in the communities. Well, to do that at scale, you have to be set up correctly. And so that's one of the reasons, that's why I love franchising, is like you can actually create this vehicle that can have such an impact, not just across the US, but all over the world. But it has to be built in the manner that can support that type of growth.
Yeah, and you're preaching to the choir. I built an entire consulting practice around the idea that we actually would help you build a franchise infrastructure and system that would be resilient and built properly. And there's a process to that, right? There's a real process to that. It's how we ended up at Pepper Lunch. I mean, the
You
story
did
is
what I
short
was
about there.
attempting to do like 10 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, it's just somebody's got to say that this is the way, and we're going to take the time and we're going to spend the money and we're going to do it right. And that is not the quick, easy, cheap way. And what you're saying is absolutely true. The industry has a really bad rap in many cases because a lot of people got sold a bill of goods that for 65 or 95 or whatever $1,000, you were going to have this ready-made for you package. And, anybody can call a lawyer and an accountant. Like, just because somebody, puts their friend on it and gets a kickback on it doesn't mean they're in your best interest. So, yeah, I mean, it really comes down to, look, I was on a stage recently at QSR Summit in Atlanta, and Matt Holler, the president of IFA, was moderating it. And I had no intention to promote the IFA, except that when conversation came from the room and we pulled the room and said, hey, how many of you are emerging or aspiring franchisors? How many of you have a brand you want to franchise or are? And, a handful of hands went up, and, they said, what do we need to know, or what do we need to do? And the answer was get help. Like, nobody's going to wake up and figure it out. Like, it's going to take a really long time. You're going to make a lot of mistakes. You're going to burn a lot of money, and you're probably going to run out of time, money, and inspiration before you get to any sort of success that you're looking for. This is not an easy business. This is not an easy thing to do, to create a franchise system and infrastructure in business. And so my common question to anybody who says they want to do it, or should I do it, or is it something we could do? Is this a brand worth franchising? I always start with, well, do you understand that you're going to start another company and you're going to do a completely different business from what you're doing today? You're going to go provide a service business. You're going to collect fees for services, goods and services. And those goods and services look like this when you're a franchisor, right? And I know I've heard you get on and rant a little bit sometimes when you learn about, I mean, it definitely frustrates you when you learn about people that have gotten bad advice or not gotten any advice, or, franchisors that aren't doing things the right way. And I'm right there with you. It's, all we can do is do our job the best we can. And I'll say this, I think, to the point of like the IFA, I think every aspiring franchisor and new franchisee or aspiring franchisee should go to an IFA conference or 2 or 5. Doesn't mean you need to hire the consulting group that has a booth. Just because they have a booth doesn't mean they're great. You need to interview them, and or all of the other vendors that are there, but at least there's education, there's information, there could be a community there could be mentorship there, and whether it's an IFA related education conference or your local state association, there's not really franchise associations much outside of the IFA, but there are some in states like Texas, big enough ones have them. We've got the CRA here in California, which encompasses all of the restaurant industry. But yeah, I think it's important to take the time, get educated, find folks. And look, people like you and I are willing to put it out here on podcasts and on LinkedIn and in social rooms, that, audio rooms like we do with a community of digital hospitality folks. The communities are out there, and I think people need to know that.
Yeah, exactly.
So Mike, a couple of topics that are top of mind. Talk a little bit about, where do you think the state of franchising is today? You've alluded to, you're seeing some improvement. You're seeing more brands do it right, but just in the macro, you're out there trying to sell a particular brand. You're interfacing with a lot of peers in your position across many brands. You do spend some time in these environments where you get to hear feedback from other folks trying to do the same thing or working on it. what do you think the state of franchising is today, and what are some topics that really have you thinking?
It's funny. Keep hearing about, the whole joint employer thing, and that's going to crush the franchise industry. And I don't think that'll ever happen. Fortunately, we do have, really good people, lobbying on the IFA that are in support of the industry. And again, I think it comes down to education and awareness. When it comes down to, the state as far as kind of what we're doing, I feel like, there's like brands in general, I think franchising is almost kind of the same thing to a certain extent, to where it just becomes commoditized. And so I feel like, from a consumer standpoint, people are looking for something different. That's just, outside of your normal, QSR fast food. But I also feel from a franchising standpoint, it's kind of the same thing. Especially, you and I, we deal with multi-unit operators all the time. A lot of these guys have, you look at the top 50 franchisee groups, or even the top 200, and the top 25, they all have a handful of similar concepts. And you got the Yum brands, and you got Popeyes, and again, nothing wrong with those at all. But I also feel too that when you get into that space, then a lot of times you're competing on, again, this is from a guest standpoint, but even from a franchising standpoint, you have franchisees that are more acquisition mode, where they might go out and they purchase a portfolio, and that's just their model. Whether there's like a specific purpose behind what that brand's doing, they're more interested in it. Again, I think that's even a different, from a franchising perspective. You have, especially these big PE groups that go out and they go acquire, and they acquire a portfolio, and they run it for 5 years, and then they flip it again. So there's that component, but then there's obviously there's the new development. And I think from a new development standpoint, that's where people are looking for something different. And I feel that more and more franchise, call it, organizations are starting to understand that, and we're starting to see it, which is super cool. And I guess what I mean by that is, brands that are more, call it, franchisee focused. As a franchisor, there's a history of this franchisor versus franchisee relationship, and it's always butting heads. I've tried to simplify things to where it's like, hey, when it comes down to making any decision as a franchisor, is it good for the brand? Is it good for the market? And is it good for that franchisee? And if you can check all three of those boxes, then I think you're on a good path. And I feel like if you look at all bad deals that have happened in the past, you probably could check all three of those boxes. And I feel that, kind of going back to the questions, hey, where do I, like, what's the state of like our space? It's encouraging, because I think more and more people and franchisors are understanding that, hey, we have something special. If we focus on our franchisees' success, then we're going to win, and the brand's going to win. Yeah, I think that's good overall for the industry in general, especially from a perception standpoint. Because I feel like, a lot of independent restaurateurs are afraid of franchising because of the stigma and the history of, gosh, I don't want to ruin my brand. I don't want to bring in, some knucklehead comes in and completely just destroys the concept. I feel like franchisors who understand that you put your people first, and if you focus on your franchisee success, then ultimately that'll never happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy for us in the emerging brand space, and the people we hang out are like begets like, right? Because we're not actively consulting out there and seeing, 20, 30 brands a year that want a franchise. I feel like I've gotten a little further away from the folks that don't get it. And I'm kind of surrounded myself with people like you that do get it. And so it feels a little insulating. I feel like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
but when you stop and list the list, I don't know how far past 10 fingers I get, actively to say, oh, they know what they're doing. They're doing it right. They're building it the right way. They get the thesis. Look, in franchising, we all understand.
You might be right. That's actually a good point.
Yeah.
We're just immersed in it. So it's, we're blinded.
We've chosen
by
to
it.
insulate ourselves around like-minded people, which is fine. I'm good. I saw a lot of bad for a long time. So look, 7 years ago, I would have told you the last thing you should do is franchise your brand. That
I remember.
corporate growth is the only way to go. I was really against it because I saw a lot of people doing it really poorly. I saw a lot of people doing it, borderline criminally, in my opinion, really charging and not giving the value back, and certainly not getting an end result for a founder that needed it. But you inadvertently answered one of my half of my next question. So my next question was, what makes a good franchisor and franchisee? You really answered the franchisor side. So when you're looking at potential franchisee operating partners, whether it's single unit, small group, or larger group, multi-unit deals, what really are you looking for in making that connection?
This continues to come up, especially with our internal discussions, because we have turned down some good size multi-unit operators because from a culture standpoint it doesn't fit. So when we look at who fits, obviously having multi-unit experience is crucial. Or if there's a money guy, he has to have an operating partner that is an equity partner that has experience in building out a market, operating multiple locations. But that's when you focus on the business, that's just one thing. But understanding their culture and how they treat their employees, and what is a life cycle of an employee? Do they have the ability to go up in the ranks? Do they have the ability to eventually have equity? And sometimes you have we're about ready to bring in a franchisee who's he's super young, but his mentalities are like he's seen what he doesn't like in the industry. And he's been in it for 10 years. Is just went from an hourly employee, but he understands that your ability to grow and scale as a franchisee is in direct proportion to the quality of your staff and your team that you bring up. And I would see that the most successful franchisee groups that I've ever seen have an incredible culture, and they allow the ability for team members to become, let's say, operating partners in the ground. They have an opportunity to actually have ownership. And in these, from a sustainability standpoint, those are the guys that they make the right decisions because it's based off of the long term versus hey, what do we need to do in the next 6 months to go from 35% COGS to 27%? And a lot of times those decisions are are short-sighted. So I think just culture, having the capital, having the experience, that goes without saying. But then culture's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're not turning down 25 to 50% of your applicants, if not 1-to-1 or even more so, you don't have a system or a process or an understanding of what your culture is. The likelihood that everybody that knocks on your door and has a check in their hand and can afford to buy one, them being a good fit and being a good operator, and realizing that this is a 10-year minimum, ideally a longer term marriage that you're getting into with each one of these entities. Boy, you got to be real serious and being short-sighted, like you said, just to take a fee, get a store open, collect royalty. That's going to beget a disaster later. Better to be thoughtful. And you guys are in a position. Let's move into talking about your brand, because you guys are in a unique position in that you built 20 plus 25 stores, corporate stores, before you even started franchising. That was an interesting decision. So I'd be curious to hear a little bit of history. But talk about Angry Chickz. What is Angry Chickz? Why did you choose to join? What's the history and what's the plan?
So Angry Chickz were Nashville hot chicken. I guess my best comparison, when people aren't familiar with, I just think of Dave's Hot Chicken. Everyone knows Dave's. They've obviously, they're the fastest growing brand that's, probably ever or something
Ever.
like that.
Yeah.
So everybody knows Dave's, and we're basically the very similar menu. And I wasn't really sure about the space when I got the opportunity presented to me, but as I did more research, I found that the last thing I want to do is get into something where is a fad and it's going to die out in 3 to 4 years, and people who spent millions of dollars now have to figure out, okay, how do I get out of this thing? Well, when I found that there's certain chili peppers that when you consume them, they actually release dopamine and endorphins, I'm thinking, okay, this isn't going anywhere.
Oh, that's why people like this stuff? I had no idea. I don't do spicy. I have to
Yeah, I
avoid
know.
spicy. So
So the product has the product has to be amazing. That's one thing. But I feel I've always I've always wanted to be a part of a brand that kind of had this like white canvas to where I could turn it into or help have a hand turn it into this vehicle that would be able to go into every single community and make a huge impact at scale and could continue growing and growing and growing, but did so in the right way. And so you have to start with the story. Met David, our founder, learned about his story. This wasn't, hey, he saw a bunch of people doing hot chicken, so he wanted to do it himself. He literally he came across hot chicken, fell in love with the idea of this like super, super hot chicken tender. And he was the guy when he was young, his kids would make him like eat a jar of like jalapenos and he would do it like no problem. So he started messing around with the recipe because at the time it was like Dave's, Howlin' Ray's. I think there was like a couple other mom and pops, but nobody was really doing it. And so tried to open a restaurant in Hollywood, got to a point to where it was either okay, we either close this, do an asset sale, and move back to Fresno, or let's see if we can make this hot chicken thing work. And it was him, his wife, his best friend, and his 2-year-old. And they decided to go out and borrow some more family money. He was already, he was going to file a bankruptcy already if he was going to go the other route. But that was November of 2018. And he just started scaling. And he opened for 6 months and he just always kind of stuck with his roots. Like, here's the humility. It's funny. 10 days go by when he opened and wasn't seeing like what he thought it would. And then all of a sudden they show up one morning. There's a huge line out the door, but there's an AT&T store right next door, and they thought that people were in line because there was some like new iPhone promotion. So they open the door of the restaurant. Everyone starts walking in. They're like looking at each other like, "Why are you guys here?" Like, "Well, we're here to eat." So I love that story because it's so innocent and it was so just not expected. And to this day, they have this funny phrase. It's like, "Do you think people will still come back?" And he started growing. He's super fast, likes to look at leases very quickly. And so now, yeah, we have 26 locations, 25 are corporate. We have 3 more corporate this year and our first big franchise location. And then we're looking to open another 10 to 12 corporate next year. And it's just been, I don't know, it's not just the story. Obviously the product's great. He has our founders, he's very innovative. He has the least amount of founder syndrome I've ever dealt with. And he knows what he doesn't know. And he's been able to understand what he has. Actually, it's funny. I still don't think he fully grasps what he has.
you don't build 25 corporate stores in 6 years and not have something.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And so he had the foresight to bring on a consultant to curate the executive team. I mean, we had everything from we have an incredible VP of marketing, supply chain. I feel is like a big component. Emerging brands don't
sure.
hit ops. We just are actually our VP of design and construction is he's starting today, which I'm super excited about. So now I can actually focus on finding a lot of my time finding the right partners. But we're building something that I've never had as much fun as I'm having now, and the components that operators always have an issue with, we've addressed. And so now to see just from a culture standpoint, like, hey, it's like everyone it just feels different. I'm not sure if that makes sense. It just
Sure.
feels different. Actually, it probably does because I think you're building exactly what like it's I've heard that there's a lot of similarities in how you guys are doing things. And I think the franchisees that you guys are bringing on, they understand that. Like they get it. We're growing. We're in the very fortunate position to where we have with as many corporate stores as we have, we're not franchising in California, which is it's funny because when I was interviewing for the position, David asked me if I had an issue that he was going to keep California corporate. I said, well, not too many people want to open restaurants in California right now, so so I'm okay
And
with
if
that.
you're crazy enough to keep opening corporate stores in California at scale, obviously you're
Well,
comfortable and figured it out. So
and I
sure.
said if we can validate the economics here in California, then I think we'll be okay elsewhere. So yeah, it's just super blessed and fortunate to where we're not itching to where we have to sign a franchisee to kind of keep things running. So it allows us to really focus and be careful on who we kind of let into our circle.
Well, I think that's the theme of the show. I think we've continuously touched on that throughout the conversation. I think you're always very thoughtful, and I'm glad that you're in a place that allows for that. That the pressure isn't, hey, sign deals, get dollars, keep the lights on, let's go. And that's always a temptation. That look, everybody has at some point, but you have to stay true to the goal and the long term implications, right? The long term results of whether that's going to be a successful relationship and is going to hurt your brand or help your brand long term, because their performance, their validation, their happiness matters in your ability to continue to grow through the franchise model long term, for sure. Mike, as we wind it down, I swear I don't write any of these down. I have nothing at the very moment I'm saying this, but we always try to end these conversations with a little levity, a little chit chat, a little get to know you on the more personal or separate from this conversation level. Tell me that I think you're into baseball. You like a little baseball?
Yeah.
So who's your team?
Angels.
The Angels. So what are your thoughts about my Japanese friend setting records and becoming one of the best baseball players ever, but he's on the other team? He's not on the red team. He's on the blue team. Talking about Shohei Ohtani, if anybody doesn't know. Not only broke a record, but re-broke it in the same night. On a night they did 20 runs brought in compared to their, I think, 6th from their competitor.
He's amazing. I grew up in the Bay Area. I was A's and Giants, and so I hated the Dodgers, especially after just was it 88 Kirk Gibson?
Yeah.
But now, I'm more of a fan of Dodgers now than I ever have been. But Shohei, he's making the marks of being one of the, obviously, if not the greatest ever. Just not just from a hitting standpoint, but from what he can do, on the mound. And as far as being an Angel fan, it hurts. The consensus is we have our ownership has their head up their ass, and when you have Shohei and Mike Trout. Now, granted, Trout hasn't been, he's had a hard time being healthy, but I was like, come on, like he wasted. I think he wasted that away. But Shohei's fun to watch, man. It's incredible to see what that guy can do. And I tell you this, when he first came up, I was watching an interview and people were saying who would win in batting practice hitting the furthest ball, and everyone kept on saying Shohei or Ohtani. And I was like, no way. But when you hear the ball off his bat, it just sounds different than everybody.
Yeah.
So,
and he's tall as hell, so that's quite unusual. All right, Mike, second to last question. We're going anywhere in the country and you can't have anything fried chicken or pepper lunch, because I'm not going to let you, brown nose the host here. Tell us of a restaurant brand. It could be a single store, franchise, doesn't matter. QSR, full service. What's a spot you've discovered in the last year or so that we should all know about and go try as foodies? Can be anywhere, any style. Just throw out a restaurant we've all got to pop into.
All right, so this might be localized. There's a poke concept, and I've had a lot of different poke concepts, and some might actually do this as well. But there's a concept down here called Poke Tiki, and it might be a franchise. I don't know, but the reason I go to them is because they have this option where I get like 4 proteins, and this thing's huge. And so it's like, double up on like spicy salmon and spicy tuna, but it's got everything in there. It is so much food, but so much protein. At my age, I'm trying to, kick up the protein. It's been like literally, I feel like I get it like 2 or 3 times a week. I always say this from this, because again, I don't know if they're a franchise. Outside of that, just recently went to Joey's for the first time in their Canadian concept, and had a really good experience there. That was actually really cool.
Did you go to Joey's in Woodland Hills?
Newport Beach.
Oh, there's one in Newport Beach now. Great. Yeah.
Actually, there's
one in Woodland Hills too.
Now there is a place I do want to go. Is my niece actually works there. It's a steakhouse, Bourbon Steak.
Bourbon Steak. All right.
And I think it's out of New York, and they have one down here in Southern California. They have one in LA, and they have one in Nashville. And that's one that I've been.
Bourbon Steak. All right.
Bourbon Steak.
But if you're in Orange County, California, or you're headed from LA to San Diego, stop at Poke Tiki.
Poke Tiki.
Poke
Newport
Tiki.
Mesa.
I'll definitely check it out. I love me some poke. Some of the best poke I've ever had in my life was in Waikiki, and it was out of a little like caravan on a corner lot. It was like a little almost food court of outdoor, food truck type vendors, but it was like a coffee shop and a bakery, a poke place, and I think a taco concept. And oh my God, best poke ever, just sitting there on the beach in Waikiki. So if you ever get a chance, but yes, I'm going to check out Poke Tiki. By the way, I'm a big tiki guy no matter what. So, if I can get poke and some Hawaiian vibes along the way, I'm happy for it. Mike, really appreciate it. Thanks for bringing the perspective. Thanks for bringing your thoughts on leadership in the franchising space to the audience. Really glad to have you, and wish you all the luck over at Angry Chickz. And even though we all have friends and all these brands that have chicken in them, we want to see everybody win. So looking forward to all the news from you guys soon.
There's enough to go around.
There's plenty of room for sure.
But
thank
Mike. You. I enjoyed it. This was fun.
Thank you for listening to The Pineapple Perspective. If you loved today's episode, leave a review and a 5-star rating. I look forward to welcoming you back next time.